Some really quick thoughts on three types of interviews: structured, semi-structured, and open or unstructured interviews. I'm going to say a little bit about the disadvantages and advantages of each, and then I'm going to talk about another particular technique associated with interviewing, critical incident technique. Starting with structured interviews. These are where you have a set list of questions that you go through in the same order and in the same way with each respondent. They're typically used in market research, for instance, in product testing, to ask people about their opinions about a new product, a new flavour, a new brand, and so on. The advantages of using structured interview questions and having a structured interview format or schedule are that you get to ask the same question of every respondent, so you can more readily aggregate the responses and you can also compare across and within. The disadvantages are that you generally get quite thin or superficial data. You might as well ask why not do a survey rather than do structured interviews. Another disadvantage is in terms of cost. It can mean that because you're getting quite thin and superficial data, you need to carry out a lot of those interviews before you learn anything worthwhile. There are also some commitments in terms of epistemology or ontology, that is the nature of things that can be known and how you think the social world is. If you're using structured interviews, that implies strongly realism, that is a view that the social world exists independently and is out there and can be measured. Talking about semi-structured interviews then, these are sort of in between, obviously, the structured and the unstructured. In semi-structured interviews, you have an interview schedule, but you have the ability to probe or ask for more detail, clarification, greater insight in relation to some of the questions. So you have the advantage of being able to compare across different interviewees, but you also have the ability to go more in depth, get a richer picture. And so you get data or information which is more like real life conversation. It's richer, it tends to be open to more sophisticated analysis and so on. Disadvantages of doing semi-structured interviews: well, you can find it hard to judge how many people you need to interview in order to allow a basis for comparison. You might also find that it requires quite a degree of skill to stick to the list of questions to make sure that you are asking everybody in your list of interviewees the same questions, and sometimes that can feel as though you're forcing the conversation in a certain direction. You have to manage time and things like that. Finally then, open or unstructured interviews. Sometimes they're also called narrative interviews, sometimes they're called biographical interviews, or those are examples of more open formats. Here you don't have a list of questions that you use for every person that you interview, and the value of doing this is that you get a much richer, more authentic, more conversational style of data, or perhaps you wouldn't even call it data, but information, what your interviewees are telling you. You can bring to bear a lot more methods. You have greater flexibility with analysing this kind of information because it's much, much richer. It's not constrained in the way that the other two formats are. Biographical interviews, they follow a format of someone's life course or their career course, but again, they're very open. They're not semi-structured. They're really trying to dig into, or more accurately, allow somebody to come forth with, elaborate on their experiences. So the advantages in terms of richness of data or information, and the disadvantages might be that you don't have a stronger basis of comparison across a number of different interviewees. It can be a lot harder actually to govern or to structure these kinds of interviews because they're more like natural conversation. It requires quite a lot of skill to get the interviewees to talk about the kinds of things that you maybe are interested in, assuming you're not holding back from any judgments about that, because they can be completely led in the direction of the interviewee. A final thing to mention, critical incident technique. This was a technique developed by Flanagan in the 50s and was originally used in the context of the Air Force to look at a whole range of problems, including personnel issues. The critical incident is something specific and salient enough that you can ask a group of people the same kind of question about the same kind of incident. So you could imagine in an organizational setting, it might be the beginning of or founding of a startup, the beginning of a company. It could be the induction of a new cohort. It could be the arrival of a new leader. It could be somebody quitting. It could be any event that is specific enough, launching a new product and so on. And what you do with that technique kind of brings to bear each element of the others. The focus is on a particular incident, and that means that you don't necessarily have to have a set list or schedule of questions as you do with structured or unstructured formats. You can delve more deeply, you can get rich data about that particular incident, but it's also more structured than the open-ended or unstructured interviews because you're concentrating on a particular technique. And this allows a basis for comparison because you're getting everybody to talk about the same kind of event or incident. So that can be quite a good research strategy if you're wanting to offset some of the advantages and disadvantages of the other three main categories. I hope that's been of some use, and best of luck with your work.